Have you ever stopped to think about how one single moment in a classroom, one student acting out and one teacher having to make a split-second choice, could actually send ripples out across an entire community? It sounds kind of dramatic, I know, but a ton of research shows this connection is very, very real. A teacher's decision right there, in that moment, can literally change a student's whole life, setting them on a path to success, or maybe a path that ends up in the justice system.
So that brings up a huge question, right? When a student's behavior gets disruptive or even aggressive, what is the right way to respond? What's the approach that not only calms things down in the moment, but also protects that student's future and keeps everyone safer in the long run? Well, the answer might not be what you think.
Okay, so when a conflict kicks off, a school basically has two paths it can go down. Path number one is all about intervention inside the classroom. The focus is on de-escalating the situation and, crucially, keeping the student in that learning environment. Path number two, well, that's the more traditional route, exclusion. We're talking suspension, expulsion, removing the student from school. And as we're about to see, the data is just crystal clear. One of these paths helps prevent crime, and the other can actually, unintentionally, fuel it. Let's start by looking at Path 2, exclusion. This approach is often a big part of what researchers call the school-to-prison pipeline. And it's exactly what it sounds like, a really troubling trend where disciplinary issues at school become these unintentional on-ramps to the juvenile and criminal justice systems.
Yeah, a huge amount of research shows this powerful link between what's called exclusionary discipline and just a whole list of negative outcomes. See, when we push kids out of school, they miss out on learning, their grades drop, and they start to feel disconnected from the whole school community. This just makes them way more vulnerable to all the risks waiting outside of school.
And the impact is, wow, it's staggering. Get this. According to the Schott Foundation, a student who is suspended just one time is 3 times more likely to drop out by 10th grade. 3 times. That one decision can completely derail their entire education.
And what's even worse is that this kind of discipline isn't applied equally. Data from the U.S. Department of Education shows, year after year, that Black students and students with disabilities are suspended and expelled at way higher rates than their peers, even for the exact same kind of behavior. This isn't because they misbehave more. It's because, as the data suggests, they're often punished more harshly.
Okay, so if pushing students out is so damaging, what's the alternative? Well, the evidence points overwhelmingly toward proactive, in-school interventions. Things that actually build skills and repair relationships, instead of just punishing behavior.
One of the most well-researched and, honestly, effective strategies is something called the good behavior game. It's a classroom management technique that completely transforms the learning environment. Instead of just singling kids out for punishment, it uses team-based competition and positive reinforcement to encourage good, pro-social behavior. In fact, some researchers have called it a behavioral vaccine because of its long-term protective effects.
And the game itself is brilliantly simple. A teacher just divides the class into teams. Then, together, they come up with a few clear positive rules. During the lesson, teams earn points for following those rules, and the winning teams get some kind of small reward. It just completely shifts the focus from, don't do that, to, hey, let's work together to succeed. And what happens? Disruptive behaviors go down, and kids get more engaged in their schoolwork.
Now, another really powerful tool set is known as restorative practices. And this is a huge philosophical shift. Instead of asking, what rule was broken and what's the punishment, this approach asks, okay, who was harmed here? What do they need? And what has to be done to repair that harm and make things right? It's all about accountability, but through healing the community.
The human impact of this can be just profound. Take Cedric, a 16-year-old who made a really serious mistake. Now, instead of just being kicked out, his school in Oakland held what they called a re-entry circle. His parents, teachers, and even his peers gathered around, not to shame him, but to create a plan to help him succeed. He was so overwhelmed by this show of support, he just smiled and said, "Y'all made me blush." That's the power of restoration over exclusion.
So, we've got these proven, effective strategies. But there's a major problem. What happens when teachers are actually afraid to use them? What happens when the system, while trying to protect students, actually makes them less safe?
For a perfect example of this, let's look at what's happening in Taiwan. Recent policies have put such strict limits on what teachers can do to manage student behavior, including any kind of physical contact, even just to safely break up a fight, that many teachers now feel like their hands are completely tied. They're terrified of legal complaints or professional ruin, so many are just choosing to do nothing. They don't intervene.
And the data on what happens next is pretty chilling. A long-term study in the Journal of Youth and Adolescence found that when teachers don't intervene in things like bullying, the chance of other students becoming victims goes up, and the chance of their classmates stepping in to help them goes down. Inaction basically lets bad behavior grow and fester.
So this creates a really dangerous choice. When teachers feel like they can't act, the problem doesn't just vanish. Oh no, it escalates. A classroom conflict that a trained teacher could have de-escalated now becomes a police matter. Instead of a learning moment, the student gets a criminal record. Instead of staying connected to school, they get pushed into the judicial system, which we know drastically increases their risk for future crime.
This all leads us to a conclusion that might sound a little backward at first, but it is grounded in solid evidence. How do we best protect our students from harm and keep them out of that downward spiral?
By legally protecting a teacher's ability to intervene. Now, let's be super clear. This is not about giving teachers a blank check for harsh punishment. Not at all. It's about empowering them to use the least harmful, most immediate, and most effective strategies. Things like de-escalation, separating students, having restorative chats, without being terrified of getting sued. This protection is what enables the path that keeps kids out of the justice system, which is the ultimate form of student protection.
So, what does this all mean? Let's put all the pieces together and trace the entire chain of events, from one classroom incident all the way to the safety of an entire community. The pathway is really clear. When teachers are trained and empowered to intervene effectively, they can stop misbehavior right in its tracks. That immediate intervention prevents things from escalating, which means fewer students get suspended or expelled, and that, in turn, dramatically lowers dropout rates. And we know that students who stay in school and feel connected are far, far less likely to get involved in juvenile crime. It's a direct line. So I guess the key takeaway here is that real school safety, it doesn't come from zero-tolerance policies that just push kids out the door. It comes from a fundamental shift in how we think about this. It comes from investing in our teachers, giving them the training in things like the good behavior game and restorative practices, giving them the support from their administration, and crucially, giving them the legal protection to act reasonably for the good of all students.
Which leaves us with one final critical question to think about. To truly protect our students, do we first have to empower our teachers? The evidence strongly suggests the two things are completely linked. If we're serious about dismantling the school-to-prison pipeline and building safer communities, maybe the very first step is to trust, train, and empower the professionals who are on the front lines every single day.